So good night, people. I'm so glad you guys are here, and we have Becky, Becky Nieves, who is one of our board members and also a board member of the I always
it's okay. Winslow Township.
Winslow County, yeah. In New Jersey, a part of the board member of the school district, and she's gonna graciously talk to us about the difference between an IEP and a 401, 405. Oh my God, you should have done a better job presenting yourself, Becky. This is bad.
It's okay. 504.
504. I inverted it. 504. So let's start with Becky before I screw up more. So welcome, Becky.
Thank you. I will forgive you anything, Carmen. It's quite all right. So I did prepare a PowerPoint for this presentation. And it was funny, by the time I got to the end of the PowerPoint, I didn't have time to put bells and whistles on it, but it was like 30 slides long. So that lets you know how complicated IEP 504 stuff is. And that didn't even scratch the surface of a lot of other experience that I've had. So trust me, it's not an exhaustive presentation. So let me make sure I have the right thing queued up. Okay, I do. Nope, I don't want that one before I share my screen. Okay. Okay, where did it go? Obviously, I haven't shared screen in a while, so I forgot how to do it properly. There it goes. All right. So there we are. So IEP versus 504 and what's the difference? Let me hide everybody's thing. I would like to start with my disclaimer. I am not an expert. Any information or advice given here should be vetted by a child study team or a school counselor, Google, YouTube, whatever you find reputable. This is just me as a parent. I've now had 13 years of IEP meetings with 2 different children with 2 different conditions, same school district, same schools, 2 very different experiences. I also have to have another disclaimer because Carmen did mention that I am a Winslow Township school board member. New Jersey has very, very strict school ethics policies. So I have to say that I am speaking solely as Rebecca Nieves, not as a part of the Winslow Township School District or on behalf of any of my fellow board members. So an IEP is an individualized education plan for a child's special education experience at school. It is protected under IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's a federal special education law. So this was put in place to provide individualized special education to meet a child's unique needs. These services are to be at no cost to families. A 504 comes from a separate federal law, which is the Section 504, which is where they get 504 plan, Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So it's actually a much older law. I believe IDEA was revised in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. So this is a federal civil rights law to stop discrimination against people with disabilities. So it's a lot more broad because IDEA is dealing specifically with education. So it provides services and changes to learning environment to enable students to learn alongside their peers. Again, these services are supposed to be provided at no cost to the families. So I did want to say something about that because I know every time I go in for an IEP meeting and I don't know what they do in other states, they tend to like to push the Medicare and Medicaid applications onto parents because they try to get reimbursed for their costs. So even though it's a free service and they can't bill your private insurance, a lot of school districts will, again, try to get Medicaid or Medicare to bill some of these things, particularly with 504, because those services are from a different fund. So 504, the definition continued is a blueprint or plan for how the school will provide support and remove barriers for a student with a disability. So who is eligible for an IEP? So there are 2 requirements. There's a list of 13 disabilities listed in the IDEA. I did not put them all there, but they're pretty easily Googled. So the disability must affect the child's educational performance and or ability to learn and benefit from the general education curriculum. The child must need specialized instruction to make progress in school. So this was where I ran into problems with my oldest. He had an IEP for just a speech impediment, but he also had ADHD. We never were actually able to get him covered under the IEP for ADHD because their claim was that it was not significantly harming his progress in school. I went through a lot of trouble and a lot of issues with that part, which I'll go into further detail when there's another slide with the steps you go through, like to resolve a dispute with your school. So with the 504, it's not one of the 13 disabilities. It could be any disability. So there's a wide range of struggles, anything that impacts their ability to learn in a general education setting. So being said, Section 504 has a broader definition of a disability than the IDEA Act. So, but it says a disability must substantially limit one or more basic life activities. This can include learning, reading, communicating, and thinking. That's why a child who doesn't qualify for an IEP might still be able to get a 504. Another thing that I read that I didn't know when I was doing research for this was that IEP goes K through 12. 504 goes K through college. So I thought that was interesting. So anybody have any questions, or am I going too fast?
I have a question. If you
Sure.
if you have an IEP,
Mm-hmm.
and then in later years, if your child is going to go to college, can you switch to a 504?
From what I was told, I mean, you can switch from an IEP to a 504 at any time. And it's funny because I actually was talking to Leanna's case manager today about this exact same situation because I'm debating whether to switch her or not. And it depends on so many factors and the child and the comfort level. Like we still haven't decided to make that transition. What I have heard is that if something isn't in place prior to their graduating, when they get to college, I mean, because every public university has to have a kind of like a student services, and that's where the child will go for those accommodations. I mean, you can get the accommodations put into place after they arrive at college. It's just easier if they have that paperwork coming in.
Right. Okay.
Anybody else or ready to go? Okay.
Well, I have another question actually.
Sure.
You said that I struggle with the fact that some kids might do okay, but it's a lot of effort. Like, do they have any way that you can measure that? Because yes, you're doing good, but it's because it's taking them 7 hours instead of 3 hours to do their job. Like, is there a way that you can count that information so it shows that they are, even though they're doing okay because they're doing more than the regular child?
Right. And that's exactly the argument that I had with my oldest, because initially when he was assessed, they actually said that he should be in just a special ed classroom due to a low IQ. They assessed him independently. We disagreed with their decision, had him independently evaluated, and they're like, he doesn't have a low IQ, he just has ADHD, but he's not hyper. So he was put on medication, and within a year, he went from a failing student to an AB student. But, with any type of psychological medication, things wear off, they lose their effectiveness, and then he would go back to struggling. And I was doing the same thing, like, okay, like he's doing okay, but you're not seeing that it takes us 3 hours every night to do his homework. And I think it really depends school district to school district. Some school districts and some schools are really great with, different disabilities, and some aren't. And like I said, I've had 2 kids go through the same school district, 2 totally separate medical conditions. With my oldest, I mean, I took them all the way to due process. With Leanna, they've bent over backwards and actually given me more than what she needs. I mean, it's really, and I think I was a better advocate by the time I got to Leanna because I've been through so much with my oldest.
I was gonna say by the second one, you probably were like, they saw you coming and they're like, oh no, she's coming.
Yeah, by the time Leanna got to school, I already had a reputation. So it was kind of like, we better give, and I think when they saw the diagnosis, you know, and they're like, wait, bleeding disorder and, you know, legal blindness, I think they got really nervous and didn't want to be, you know, liable, especially since they knew that I had no problem lawyering up if I needed to. You know, so sometimes it's not a bad thing to, and I will say not to just have a reputation, but, you know, get known as the parent who's going to ask questions and ask them again and again and again. Some people might say it's being difficult. I think it's just advocating because, you know, the one thing, you know, people are so confused between IEP and 504 is because it's so much jargon. And you can sit in an IEP meeting and they'll throw 10 different acronyms at you. And while you're trying to figure out what that means, you know, they're writing your goals for your child. So, you know, my one thing that I would just tell parents is just continue to ask questions, continue to push, and continue to question because they can't kind of force you into a treatment. At the end of the day, you have to sign off on it. So that was my little spiel on that. Any other questions?
Okay. No, I was just going to elaborate on the fact when we were going through it with Kylie and it was her first time, I went to a big meeting with a bunch of other parents that were there for various reasons. And my experience compared to like another family that was maybe dealing with like some autism or something, their experience was very, very different because we just having a doctor involved and kind of getting her in the program was just like you said, the diagnosis and having different things that they could count on made it very different.
Yeah, total huge difference. So let's see. Oh, so this one's interesting. So we have the Independent Education Evaluation for an IEP. So this is another one of those acronyms that they'll throw out. This is the IEE. With an IEP, the families can ask a school district, like if you don't agree with their testing. So I will say in Leanna's case, I'm pretty sure she was given every test. So they will do a family social history. They'll do a psychological evaluation. They'll do an educational evaluation where they're measuring their IQ in like 10 different ways. Occupational therapy, physical therapy. I'm sure I'm missing one, but I know we went through all of those when she was transitioning from early intervention into regular public school. So, and if you don't, you know, and the parents by law, they have to give you a copy of that report, of all those reports within a certain amount of time. And if you don't agree with any of them, you can ask a school district to pay for an independent evaluation. Now, I did that with my oldest. They refused. And a family, you can always go and pay. So I know in our case, we did look at what an independent evaluation would cost for his particular situation. And it was something in the range of $3,000. And I know we were told by the school district, you know, you can bring whatever valuation you want, but we don't have to abide by it. And that's pretty much how it went. So, you know, you really have to weigh the cost. I mean, sometimes it's good just for you to know, even if the school district doesn't abide by it. So if I had to do it over again, I probably would pay for it. But you know, again, it's really up to the school district. And then if you don't agree with their decisions, there's a process that you go through, you know, to dispute those things. Now, for a 504, you cannot ask for an independent evaluation. But again, you do have the option of paying ones for yourself. But again, the school district may or may not give it any weight. So there's one major difference with a 504. So IEPs are can be very thick documents. Once I stop sharing screen, I actually have Leanna's IEP next to me. It's about 20 pages long. So they are big, they can be very big documents. In an IEP, there's a whole team. So there's a parent's child or caregiver, at least one of the children's general ed teachers, a special education teacher, the school psychologist or other specialists, a district representative. With a few exceptions, the entire team must be present for IEP meetings. And I can attest to that. We have waited. Sometimes there's been a teacher that they've had to pull to, they will not start the meeting until they have each one of those things covered. Particularly with our kiddos, I know with Leanna's IEP, somebody from the Commission for the Blind is also required to sit in her IEP meetings. Another thing that you generally don't, like I didn't find it when I was reading for doing this presentation, you can print, as a parent, you have a right to have anybody else you want in the meeting with you to advocate with you. If it's your neighbor down the street, Joe Schmo from your church, whoever it is, whoever you feel comfortable or you want to have in that room as a support system, whatever the case may be. I mean, there are professional advocates too that you could even hire. You have that right to have anybody you want in there, because IEP meetings, especially first ones, can be hugely overwhelming and there's so much information that you might feel like you might miss something. So I always tell new parents, like, you know, if you don't have the other parent or support person, whoever it is that you need in there with you. So with the 504, it's a little less stringent, obviously, than an IEP, and it's not as specific, whereas the IEP, they have to have those dominoes in place. They don't have to do so for a 504. So it's just created by a team of people who are familiar with the child and understand the evaluation data and special service options. So it can include, obviously, your parent caregiver, general special education teacher, school principal. So it's, I guess, not as intense, but I'm sure some school districts probably treat them the same. I will disclaim, I haven't ever done a 504 meeting, so I'm not sure on the intensity with that, but I know IEP meetings are pretty intense. Okay, and gotta love when your screen goes dark. There we go. Oh, seriously. Can you tell I haven't done Zoom in a little bit? All right, there we go. Okay, so what is in an IEP? Like I said, it can be a very big document. The IEP sets learning goals and describes the services the school will provide. It's a written document. It's also a written legal document, and a binding. So if the school violates the IEP, you know, there are consequences. Some of the most important things the IEP must include is the child's present level of academic and functional performance. So how the child is currently doing in school. There has to be annual education goals for the child and how the school will track progress. So like in Leanna's IEP, like some of the first ones she had, like in preschool or kindergarten, it was Leanna will recognize the letters of the alphabet correctly 80% of the time. And that's how they would track her progress. The services a child will get, this may include any special education, related supplementary or extended school year services. So if they needed PT or OT, I've seen IEPs for other related services where maybe they shorten the school day for the child if the child can't sit for the whole, 7-hour school day. The timing of the services, when they start, how often they occur, how long they last. If they're getting PT twice a week, OT once a week, that sort of thing. So any accommodations, which are changes to the child's learning environment. So if your child needs to sit at the front of the room to be able to see the smart board, that is an accommodation because you're changing the actual physical environment. Modifications or changes to what the child is expected to learn or know. So if there's a multiple choice test, instead of having A, B, C, D options, your child may only have A, B, C. So that's changing how they're learning. How the child will participate in standardized tests. And as we were talking earlier, New Jersey is still one of, I think, of only 12 states where they still require standardized testing. But there is a right to refusal of standardized testing, which I utilized until this year for Leanna, because I just think standardized tests aren't the greatest measure of a child's intelligence. But there can be accommodations made. So the format which they take them, how long they have to take them, whether they need breaks for eye fatigue, whether they need a paper format enlarged, those sorts of things. And also another thing that people don't realize is how will the child be included in general education classes and school activities? You know, how their participation can be affected for after school events. They should also have some participation with just their general education peers. They should be taking gym class or have some connection to the general education population. So 504, a little less than 10. There is no standard 504 plan. It's kind of like a thumbprint, sort of. It depends on what those child needs. And it also doesn't have to be a written document, which is kind of where 504 is making me a little bit nervous, because I kind of like to have that document there. But a 504 plan generally will include whatever specific accommodations, supports, or services for the child, who provides the service, and who's responsible for making the plan is implemented. So a lot simpler, but also less restrictive. And when you're comparing IEP to 504, like again, IEP may seem more legally binding, but a 504 is less restrictive. So I really think it depends on the needs of your child and what you feel comfortable with, what they feel comfortable with once they're of an age where they can give you their opinion, which is kind of where I'm at with Leanna right now, because she doesn't like some of her IEP accommodations at the moment. I'll pause for any questions, comments. Nope. Okay. So notice, I mean,
The 504 is not legally binding?
it is legally binding. And that's the conversation that I actually had with Leanna's case manager today, because that's been my #1 hesitation with changing her from an IEP to a 504. It's legally binding, but it's like, I don't want to say it's a downgrade to go from an IEP to a 504, but I just get kind of nervous in that, and this is what I explained to her case manager. It's like, once you ring the bell, it's like you can't unring the bell. So my concern with always has been like, if I step her down from an IEP to a 504 and I want to bring some of those services back, you know, you may find yourself in a position where they can say, okay, well, we need to go through the evaluation process all over again. And then you go to those, okay, you know, you have to give the child study team 30 days notice, and then they have 90 days to complete all the evaluation, you know, so it is legally binding. It has, I think, less supports in place. And just for a parent like me, where I'm kind of helicopterish, maybe, I guess, that's kind of been my hesitation. So kind of with an IEP and the conversation that I had in particular today with Leanna's case manager was an IEP can, in some regards, be almost as least restricting as a 504. If you just sneak down the modifications a little bit, because like with an IEP, you're required, like for each subject matter, you know, there's in-class resource teacher, because IEP has another big difference, and I don't think I have in my presentation, is with an IEP, for every subject that they need it, there needs to be a special education teacher in the classroom. With a 504, they're in general education, and there may not be that special education support in the classroom with them. But with an IEP, let's say Leanna would need a resource teacher for maybe just math. So then I can pull it out of the IEP for all her other subjects. So that was one of the things they discussed. And that's another big difference between the IEP and the 504, just having that other teacher in the room as a resource, you know, should they need it. If that makes sense. Okay, so with the IEP, they're very specific in like how much notice they have to give. So like I said, you have 30 days to do this, 15 days to do this, and I'm sure it varies with state to state too. With 504, they don't have such stringent deadlines. So the notification might be only if there's like a big change. And again, it doesn't have to be in writing. With IEP, they're very big on documentation. Like every time you have a meeting, okay, you need to sign that you were here, you had this meeting, you agreed. Every time, it's always documented. 504, less so. And again, with consent as well. So with an IEP, you have to consent in writing for every evaluation that they are going to do to your child. And you have to sign off before they can even provide the services to your child. 504, I mean, in some cases, verbal consent is good enough for them to implement the plan. So like the case managers like to tell me, the IEP is a fluid document. They have to review it at least once a year, but at any time I can pick up the phone and talk to my case manager like I did today. Hey, this kind of bothers me or that kind of bothers me. And it can be tweaked as you go through. Legally, child must be reevaluated every 3 years to determine whether services are still needed. So every 3 years, you'll go through the same battery of tests that they initially did or determine that the child still needs to take. 504, again, it's another one of those areas where it varies state by state. So, but good practice is that they would review it each year and do an evaluation also. So this is where it gets interesting. Let me pause again. Anybody have any questions on that before I get to my fun tales of woe of trying to resolve disputes with the school district?
Well, one thing that I always have struggled when I've helped parents with these things, with the IEP, sometimes you kind of worry about the social aspect of what happens to these kids, because sometimes I think that there's just too much, almost. It's like they're singled out, and because they need these special services, and they always have an adult with them, and I find that sometimes that it may be a little bit problematic for some kids.
Yeah, I mean, and that's definitely, it's almost stigmatized.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, and this is kind of where, and I've actually had these conversations with case managers, and even like, so Leanna literally has her document right now is probably definitely over what she needs, because it's pretty much, I have the same accommodations in place that I did when she went to school when she was 3. Now when I had 3-year-old Leanna and learning about HPS, I'm like, I want everything you're going to give me. You're going to give me a 1-to-1 aid, I'll take it. You're going to give me door-to-door bus transportation, I'll take it. And literally, it's everything but the kitchen sink is in her IEP. So you're right. And now what she's doing now at this age, she's like, Mom, I don't need a 1-to-1 aid. So she's like, it's funny. It's still in her IEP, and they do have one in the classroom. And in no uncertain terms, she pretty much told her 1-to-1 to get lost. So she's helping the other kids in the classroom. So,
yeah, I kind of thought that would happen sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, it did. But when I first had her in school, I'm thinking, okay, legally blind kid, bleeding disorder. I want somebody following her all over the damn playground all the time. So that was like, that was my thinking then. Now it's kind of like, all right, Mom, I don't need that anymore. And even talking with other parents, I don't think I've actually ever encountered another parent that had a 1-to-1 aid for their child for HPS. So I'm definitely an outlier. But again, it's one of those things where now I'll call her case manager and say, okay, we can drop the 1-to-1. I actually didn't drop it this year because Leanna said, well, she is helping other kids in the class, because right now, because of her IEP, she's in an inclusive classroom. So, maybe half of the kids in her class have an IEP. So the special education teacher kind of helps everybody so that no child is singled out as to whether or not they have an IEP. So there's, two additional people in the room. But yeah, that's definitely a concern.
That is nice.
But that's a good thing if they help
Yeah.
other kids, because it doesn't make you feel so different.
Yeah, like we've been really fortunate with Leanna's aides for the most part. She's got pretty independent very early on, and they were really good about giving her a space. So if they saw her kind of struggling, they'd step in. If not, they would just kind of hang back and let her do her thing. So like we've been fortunate. I remember this year, because there's been a shortage, with COVID, people getting aides back in the classroom. She actually didn't get her one-to-one until mid-year. I didn't push it because, she didn't really need it. So when the one-to-one did come in the classroom, her case manager at the time called me and they're like, Mrs. Nieves, does Leanna know she has a one-to-one in her IEP? And I'm like, yeah, she knows she's had it since she's been in school. They're like, well, she's not using the one-to-one. And I'm like, you might want to talk to her. I guess they didn't want it. They wanted me to do it. So, of course I did the dirty way. She's like, yeah, but she's there, but she can help the other kids out over here. So, that's just how it went with us. Like I said, and it definitely is coming to, I think as they get older, depending again on your child, the situation and needs. I know in Leanna's case, we're thinking about dialing back some of her services. Like this year, for instance, before COVID, the bus stop, like instead of the bus stop being down the street, the bus picked her up and dropped her off in front of our house so that she didn't have to walk any intersections or corners. So this year she's like, well, I'll try the regular bus. I was like, okay. That lasted about a week. And then she was like, I don't think I like riding the bus at all. She's like, because it's too noisy and I can't read. So now mom has turned into chauffeur. So now she doesn't want to ride the bus for a whole different reason. But, it's stuff like that happens, and just her quirkiness. So the fun part with the how to resolve disputes. So with an IEP, there's kind of like levels that you go through, and everything that I usually does happen in this order. So first, there's mediation. That happens like within district. The parents and the school psychologist or child study team will come together and try to work it out. If that doesn't happen, then you would go to a due process complaint. So that's a formal request for a hearing to resolve a dispute about special education. That can be filed by the family or the school. And it usually is a disagreement over what services a child needs. So in my oldest case, this is what I did. I filed a due process complaint. So before it actually goes to a hearing, there's the resolution session. So in this case, they actually sent a state mediator to the school district to talk to both of us to see if we could come to an agreement. Usually lawyers are not involved in this yet. Then there is a civil lawsuit, and I can tell you with lawsuits, and again, I'm pretty sure this doesn't vary state to state, but there's a lot of federal and state protections for schools. It's actually really hard to sue a school district. There has to be something really, really egregious because they have a lot of protections. Because, even in my role as a board member, I can see the variety of complaints that are brought against school districts, and they would be in court all the time because it's just difference of opinion or parenting styles or what's being taught in the classroom and things of that nature. So then there's the state complaint. So again, it's just an escalation of that. I know in New Jersey, what ended up happening with us, we ended up going to a due process hearing. So we actually had to drive to the Capitol, and we had a hearing before, like a judge mediator type. And then they usually have a ruling that they go to, and then you can even appeal that ruling. And then the final step again is more instead of just a civil lawsuit, it's just a lawsuit period. And again, most education attorneys will tell you that it's really hard to do, because I've consulted several over the years. And I mean, I don't know if it's different state by state. I know with New Jersey, it's just really hard to sue a school district.
And just to clarify, Becky, this is if you feel like your child is not getting the accommodations that they deserve, is when you would go through this?
Not even that. Like with my oldest case, it wasn't like he had an IEP in place for a speech impediment, but they wouldn't do anything for the ADHD. So they weren't even agreeing. They wouldn't even evaluate him at that point.
Okay.
So it could be at any point during, like, if you feel like your child should be getting services and they're not, whether they should be evaluated, whether those accommodations are appropriate. If at any point during the education process, that's kind of a step she would follow.
Okay.
But you have to initiate some type of contact with like the child study team. So you can't just go ahead and file a complaint against the school if you haven't even, reached out to the child study team. But anything after that point, yeah. So I haven't been through anything with the 504, but my research with this said there's several options for resolving disagreements with the school as well. So there's mediation, alternative dispute resolution, an impartial hearing, a complaint to the Office for Civil Rights. And I'm assuming at that point, because a 504 is under a civil rights federal law, that's why you would go to the Office for Civil Rights, as with the IEP. And I can't remember the name of the office that handles it. It's a separate office though. So it's like a different department, I guess. And then again, a lawsuit, but those are pretty difficult. So with funding and cost, a family should never be charged for services with an IEP or a 504. The difference with an IEP, as states do receive additional funding for students with IEPs. I know, sitting as a board member, I can tell you that states kind of work out a formula for how many students with IEPs there are per district. And when states award funding to the school districts, that's kind of how they calculate, part of how they calculate what a school district is going to get. So with the 504, the states do not receive any extra funding. But again, the federal government can take away funds if they don't follow through. So that's why, particularly with 504s, you'll really see the push. Like if it's a family who's on Medicare, Medicaid, they'll want to either get the family to apply for those things or try to bill Medicare and Medicaid so they can get reimbursed from that. And obviously you can't use IDA funds to service 504 because it's two separate programs. So there's a bunch of slides here, and coming to the end of my presentation, just with jargon. One of the things that I know that I was overwhelmed with when I first started going to meetings was the amount of acronyms and just specialized terms. It felt like you were being spoken to in a whole different language. And if you think about jobs that we hold, or even talking about HPS, like we use acronyms all the time, obviously, when we're talking about our kids' symptoms. And to us, it's second nature and like breathing. So we don't, I kind of have sat in IEP meetings and I'll have this pause and say, you know what, explain it to me like I'm a kindergartner. Because, it's you have to kind of pause and think, do people understand the jargons and the acronyms that you're throwing at them? And when I explain HPS to people, I kind of put myself in that mindset to, okay, explain it to them like they're maybe not a kindergarten, maybe a fifth grader, but, just remembering that not everybody's comfortable with the acronyms that are there. So before I go in, and there's so much more jargon than what I put on these slides, but before I start going through any of it, did anybody else have any questions? Okay. So some of these are pretty self-explanatory, like an accommodation. Again, that's the change to the student's learning environment. So for our kiddos, that's sitting in front of the class, so they can see the board better. It's facing away from any windows so there's not a glare. We're changing a barrier in the classroom that might impede their learning. Annual goals. I mean, goals are a big thing. With an IEP, there's not goals in a 504, but an IEP document will have annual goals and percentages on what they're expected to have accomplished by the end of the year. So like any good goal, you know, it should be realistic and measurable. And again, another acronym that a lot of people use, not just in IEPs, but in any goal setting process. Is it a SMART goal? Is it specific? Is it measurable, attainable, results oriented, and time bound? You know, you can't just put out a goal that, you know, Leanna's going to read better by the end of the year. Like, what does that entail? What's it going to take to get her to read better by the end of the year? One that should be really familiar to us is assistive technology. So any device, equipment, or software that helps the student perform better in the environment. And it could be simple things like, you know, when Leanna was younger, it was like this little magnifying ruler type thing or page that she could put on top of something and it would magnify. It could be the little glass dome. You know, then you get to monoculars, you get to CCTVs, you get to handheld CCTVs, you get to iPads, things like that. Behavior intervention plan, a plan designed to proactively teach and reinforce positive behavior. So again, positive strategies to implement behavior. And that entails a whole nother separate thing like a functional behavioral assessment, which is something that I don't think comes standard with an HPS IEP. But if there were any behavioral issues, you know, that's a route that would happen. So extended school year services. This is actually a pretty big topic this year, and not just for kids with IEPs or 504. Because of the learning loss with COVID, even gen ed students are being offered extended school year services just to kind of catch kids up. So that's any school that happens outside of the normal. I know in New Jersey, it's 180 days that they have to be in school. So during break, weekend, summer session, I know our district is offering extended, we do extended school year services every year. We've expanded it this year to include more students just who need help catching up. Now, the next one is kind of where I was getting at with like the IEP versus the 504, and it's the least restrictive environment. Every IEP in 504 should strive for, and I think this is what Lily was talking about too, the least restrictive environment. So the most optimal place where a child can learn without the stigma or feeling different, you know, just and have the most mobility. So being taught in the same setting as their peers who don't have disabilities. And it says in most circumstances, schools must offer services supports to help students with an IEP thrive in a general education classroom. You know, unless you have someone with a really profound disability where they have to be in like a self-contained classroom, you know, you generally want to have students at least 80% of the time in a general education classroom setting. At least that's how it works with our standards in New Jersey. So again, modification, that's just any change in what they're expected to learn and demonstrate. So it was funny, actually, it was just this year that I learned, and I didn't even realize it was happening, like with Leanna, I used the multiple choice example, and that's what they were doing with her assignments. Instead of giving her 4 choices and multiple choice, they were giving her 3. And I didn't realize that until I was at one of her regular, you know, end of semester meetings, and I'm like, no, don't do that. I was like, she's fine, you know, but I can see where that might be a modification that somebody may need. Parent report is pretty self-explanatory. So generally with IEPs, like when I get her report card, they also send a different report that speaks just to her IEP on how she's doing and meeting the goals set by the IEP. And the whole positive behavior going along with the behavior assessments there, progress reporting, which I just mentioned on how the school reports. And it usually does happen as often as report cards, and the same as for general education students. And you see the present level of performance, and they have a whole bunch of acronyms, and I've actually seen most of these, but it pretty much means the same thing, just where are they currently at the time the IEP is written. Did somebody have a question? I'm sorry, I thought I heard somebody. No, okay. And then you want to make sure, everything has to be standards based. So you want to put the goals of the IEP based on the academic performance of what the state expects anyone to be learning. Supplementary aids and services. So again, any assistive technology, audiobooks, highlighted notes, or even having a one-to-one in Leanna's case. And related services, that would be your PT, your OT, the transportation service accommodation that I had for Leanna as well. Oh, I thought I was done. Oh, apparently there's one more. Oh, okay, this is the last slide. So response to intervention, RTI. Now I know in New Jersey, RTI is now something that they do for everybody. It's not IEP or 504 specific. So basically, it's just a way that teachers identify who's struggling, and they do it in a way that, like I said, since everybody gets RTI, nobody really notices the teacher pulling one kid as opposed to the other, because they'll generally, I know in our schools, they'll like put them in groups and everybody has their own RTI time, but what the teachers are actually doing is grouping them according to how much assistance they actually need. And then once you get to a point, there's a transition plan. Once your child turns 18, legally, unless you have guardianship, all decision-making powers, IEP 504 goes to them. I know, and I don't know if this is New Jersey specific or not, but I know once Leanna hits 14, they will include her in the invitations to her IEP meetings, just because at that age, they figure they can play a role in their part. And that was it.
So one question.
Yep.
The IEP, is that considered a state program, or do they also get federal funding?
No, so for IEP, they do get federal funding and they get state funding. And it's more, I can tell you just by looking at our budget, it's more state, because the federal government will give, it's definitely more state, because then the state will take whatever it gets from the federal government plus their own tax levy. And again, it's a simple calculation. They'll say, okay, in 2021, this district had 20% of students with an IEP. Maybe we'll guesstimate that that'll increase by 2%, and then they'll recalculate the funding that the state gets.
So the availability of services can vary from state to state based
Very
on the
much.
funding?
Even not even just based on the funding, but also based on just staff availability. One thing I found, like even talking with other parents of kids with albinism in different states, like New Jersey's Commission for the Blind, while they're really great, like they've given Leanna all the tech she could possibly want. She's got 2 CCTVs, one for school, one for home. She's got a Ruby reader. She's got an iPad Pro. She's gotten several monoculars. But when it comes to actually getting a TVI out to do one-on-one with her, there just aren't enough TVIs in the state of New Jersey. So she doesn't get, like I've heard where some kids with albinism, they'll get a weekly session with the TVI. The TBI in Leanna's case is actually her case manager, who has a caseload of 200 or whatever. So I hear from her once or twice a year, usually when we're doing an IEP meeting. So depending on funding, depending on whether or not they have the staff, it can definitely, and now with COVID, it's actually throwing even more of a monkey wrench into it, because they're not getting the paraprofessionals in there for the one-to-one for kids. the PT, the OTs, the people who were working per diem who kind of lost their jobs during the pandemic and might have, decided to do something else. So it's definitely making following IEPs and 504s challenging, for sure.
I think it's also, it even depends within a state, because I remember when one of our members was here in Massachusetts, they lived in Gardner, which is outside, like it's, I think it's Western Massachusetts. So their services were not at all as the services that they got when they lived closer to Boston. So I think that even within a state, there's differences.
Yeah. I was gonna say,
Yeah,
yeah,
even-
school district to school district is very different where we're at. But I like ours is opposite than yours, Becky. Our teacher for the visually impaired is my kid's like main contact person. Like they don't have a one-to-one, they never have, but I don't even think they could. I mean, if they really, really, truly needed it, but I think the qualification for that would have to be pretty significant. We just don't have the staff for kids to have, like, it's hard to get the kids that even need it. It's hard to get it here versus luckily we do have our visual teacher. So it's interesting. Location to location is very different.
Oh, is there any consolation? I grew up without a one-on-one and I'm still alive. So that was good. I think you guys will be fine.
Yeah.
Well, I
no,
grew up
definitely.
without a one-on-one in a public school,
Mhm.
with no vision. It was a bit of a struggle.
It was,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say, like, I'm sure there's little accidents I could have avoided if I had a one-on-one, but I think that kids also, you get the cues from your kids, and kids will fight it because of course you don't want to be different and you don't want to be, like you want to be like everybody else. You don't want to call attention on yourself. So people, but I think that at some point they realize, like, wow, wait a minute, why am I struggling with this? This is a lot easier to do, to use the monocular than getting up and trying to read the board. Slowly they'll get it, as long as you keep all those tools available.
Mm-hmm.
Like people is like, oh, I don't think my kid needs the cane. Well, leave it around. He might like it.
Mm-hmm.
He might find that it's actually a lot easier to navigate than not having a cane, or leave the monoculars. And some people use CCTVs and they're great with them, and some people hate them and make them dizzy and can't handle it. And the other thing with HPS is that we are so different in terms of amount of vision. I think like Kylie probably, how much is Kylie's vision? I think Kylie is like Nancy, that she probably will be able to drive.
Oh my goodness. It has been the discussion of the weekend because she talked with Nancy and Kelly, and oh boy, is that on the table. So we're navigating that right now.
So that's something like, it's also different. And then you have people like Heather and me that they would not give us a license to carrying a dog.
Well, but even just because do you wear contacts or anything, Carmen?
I wore contacts, but then they made me too light sensitive that I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, that's the
my
thing,
vision
like,
is a lot
vision
more
so
too.
Yeah.
My vision, like Nancy is like with contacts, with glasses. Nancy is not legally blind,
Mm-hmm.
which also brings you to the fact that if you have, I struggle with this because some parents are so excited that their kids is not legally blind that the difference between legally blind and low vision is so small that they lose so much. Like if a parent come and tell me, oh, my son is 2180, 20,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be like, okay, so 2200 is legally blind, 2180 is not. The difference in vision for those numbers is so small that it's going to be more of the struggle not to have the services than it is to have the services.
Yeah.
So sometimes I tell parents, don't fight it.
Yeah.
Don't fight it, because the difference is a 504 or an IEP. Because if you have a child who's legally blind, they get an IEP.
Okay, I have a question because technically, okay, Gab's previous prescription was 2,200. Now, I'm assuming it was because we were in a different state. Florida does not do IEPs for medical diagnosis. They don't do IEPs for medical things. It's a 504. So now that we're here, it's still a 504. So her vision, I think, improved. So she's technically not at 2,200 still, but I haven't updated it at the school yet. So I don't know, should she have an IEP or are we gonna stay with the 504?
Well, what are you getting the services that she needs? That's the basic question. Is she
So,
getting,
well, we actually just had to update it a couple weeks ago because now with her lupus diagnosis, her 504 is both for her HPS and the lupus. So she gets like modified assignments. So like Becky was saying with Leanna getting like, instead of 4 multiple choice questions, she'll get 3. Well, in Gab's case, if they have 20 questions, she's supposed to get 10. Or if they're supposed to write like a 5-paragraph essay, she's supposed to get half of that. She's supposed to be getting extended time to complete assignments. Gym right now, it's optional. It's up to her discretion. For state testing for next year, she's gonna get a paper copy instead of computer. I'm trying to think what else did they put in there for her. Large print when they're able to get it.
see, that's,
And
I
then,
don't like that language. That print when they're able, like, what would they be able to get large print? That's ridiculous.
So, well, and last year, like her old school, they didn't want to get her large print books because they're like, the paper is so big that it's like it would take her longer to read it or something. So she's never had like large print books. And even like when they do her like the novels that they read in class, like once she gets it, I go out and buy her the large print version. So then she has it. But all of the stuff right now I buy for her. So like her magnifiers, the large print books, like I get it for her.
They're even supposed to let you use like have you gone to your library? The library sometimes have the book actually on audio.
Yeah, well, since we moved, I got them library cards. We haven't visited our library yet, just because we've literally seen, I don't know, we've probably been at like 100 doctor's appointments in the last 5 months. So just doing anything different.
Well, you can access
everything's been pushed back. I haven't even.
Yeah, you can access the library through the internet. Like then you can go into your local library, and with your library card, you can access I think it's called, what is it called? Libby?
Oh, they have Libby, they have Hoopla. But Legna, now that you're back in New Jersey, I mean, definitely get in touch with the commission because with Leanna, I mean, that she has an iPad Pro now. So with that, she has a free membership to, what is it? What is that? Bookshare. Bookshare.
Bookshare.
It's Bookshare. So she can pretty much download just about any book. And if there's a textbook, so she downloads whatever she wants for free with that app. And the Commission for the Blind sets you up with that account. Also with textbooks, if she needs a certain textbook in large print, so you're right, because carrying around those large print textbooks are they don't even do that anymore. It's counterproductive. I know they don't do it in Jersey. So if she wants a certain textbook in large print, your case manager should be able to go to the state and say, hey, you need to purchase this, so she can download it onto the commission provided iPad.
Yeah. And then the case manager, that's through the commission, right? Like that's the person that we do everything with?
Well, you'll have, I know since Leanna has an IEP, she has her case manager who's at the school district, and then we have a case manager who's through the commission. So the case manager through the commission, that's where and there's a couple different parts. Like she has her case manager, there's orientation and mobility person if she wants the cane training. And then there's just the tech guy. And it's funny, the commission's tech guy is actually legally blind himself too. So when
Wait, I
Leanna,
think that used to be Gab's
it was starts with a
case.
D, and I can't remember his name, but he set up her iPad, and they did it like during COVID, so it was like FaceTiming, and he set up her whole thing with all the different specs and features
Yeah,
and
I
everything.
think when we were still here before we moved, and because she had first grade, she had her case for the commission. Pretty sure that's the guy that came to my house and did her evaluation.
But the other thing is, and Lily, correct me if I'm wrong, for the commission, does she have to be 2,200? Because in Massachusetts, to get services from the commission, you have to be 2,200.
In New Jersey, you don't.
Okay.
But there's different levels. So in New Jersey, if you're 20, and again, that's right, like don't fight it. Because if you're 2,200, you're considered Title 1. And that's how Leanna gets, I mean, whatever tech I want, she pretty much gets. So she's got a better iPad than we do. You know, and then I think once if you're just low vision but not legally blind, like the amount that you're entitled to and even the accommodations that you're entitled to
Right.
actually decrease. Now I will tell you, like, now that Florida lied to you. Remember I said there were 13 disabilities that they have to require for an IEP. Legal blindness was one of the 13. She could have had an IEP in Florida.
Yeah, no, they're like, it's a 504.
Yeah, I mean, 504, a lot of people with medical diagnoses will go with the 504 just because it goes back to that impact on learning. Like I said, with a 504, like you're not going to get, like I have Leanna's IEP now. So that's Leanna's IEP.
Yeah, Gab's 504 is 3 pages, I think.
Exactly. So this is full of like, you know, goals and planning. Like,
Yeah.
so Leanna's, one of them is, hold on, this actually even gives me, so she had a psychological evaluation, occupational therapy evaluation, learning evaluation, physical therapy. They did a social history interview with me. You know, it was one of her goals is read, write, and compare decimals to 1,000. And they go by, you know, different subject areas and things like that. So big document. A 504, yeah, it could be 1, 2, 3 pages because there's not those goals and standards to meet.
Yeah, I think and they did her 504 because based on the accommodations the eye doctor recommended, it's not a lot. It's sit in the front row, make sure like the shades are down.
Was your doctor a low vision doctor?
It's a pediatric ophthalmologist.
No, I think that she needs to go to a low vision doctor because the low vision doctor is the one that's, which is usually optometrist. They're the ones that know what accommodations and what is the equipment that's available. They know, like they are the ones that give you the monoculars and the different magnifiers and the rubies. So they know what's available and what she'll be able to use.
So how do we even see one?
Well, if you get connected through the commission, they'll probably have a list of doctors. I know Lily has also, I don't know, is Lily there? Not sure she's still there. Lily can, you can contact Lily and she probably can give you a list of people too that she might know from when she worked at the commission in New York. I think, isn't the eye clinic in Philly that you go to, Becky? They should have.
Yeah, the one. Yes, it's actually Dr. Appel. Funny enough, she's the low vision expert we saw at the Salis Eye Institute in Philadelphia, and she's the one that said, okay, Leanna needs an iPad, Leanna needs a CCTV, and this, and that's how we got all the tech that we got. I don't know how far of a drive Philly would be. Are you back in the same area of Jersey?
Yeah, I'm in Middlesex County, but also, okay. So if I go see the low vision doctor, I'm assuming I have to do that through my insurance. right?
Well, depends.
Like
If you
like
go,
a
it depends. If you go through the commission will send you to somebody that they will pay for. If you go through
Okay.
your independently, then you pay like I see mine, and mine, because I go through the commission, it's paid through the commission. If I wanted to go on my own, like if I could still go, and my insurance will cover it because it's vision. It's like it's a vision test. But when they do an evaluation, they check, they bring all the equipment and you can try it. Like they'll bring the iPad and see, okay, how do you do with the iPad? And they'll bring the Ruby and they see how you do with the Ruby or the CCTV. So they have the ability to show you and to show her and let her see what she can use.
okay.
Yeah, I
And
know when
a
I
lot-
went to
okay.
a lot-
the I Institute, I went through our private insurance because I was just impatient, but I'm pretty sure I could have used commission if I had wanted to.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just like our insurance is a pain in the butt because we have military insurance. So everything is referrals. So I can only go to the ones they cover. So I would have to see if they even cover it to begin with. And knowing them, I probably would have to drive to like New York or something
Mhm.
to see one. But I'll look into that because I didn't know it was like a different doctor she was supposed to see.
Mhm. And did you say she has lupus?
Yeah.
All right. So, should we just close the
Yeah, I was gonna say I was gonna stop recording because,
Okay.
and I'll probably cut off the past 20 minutes because I don't think that was